What do the beginning of smart cities, the end of smartphones, trends versus trendy, GDPR, China, May, September, and October, and the Karate Kid have in common? I'm Tanya Hall for ZDNet, and joining me is Amy Webb. She is the founder of the Future Today Institute, professor of Strategic Foresight at NYU Stern School of Business, and author of The Signals Are Talking. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. You know, you've come out with your latest tech trend report for 2018, and you recently spoke about it at South by Southwest. In the report, you identified 225 emerging technology trends across 20 different industries. Give us a summary of the most important trends.
So every year we look through lots of different areas of innovation and research and work. And I just want to preface all of this by saying we don't have set category areas. So we're doing a lot of multidisciplinary research all at once, and whatever bubbles up, bubbles up. So some of our key findings from this year's report, have to do with things that maybe are sort of obvious, like, AI is not on the horizon. It's right now. It just didn't show up the way that a lot of us expected. And within AI, we don't identify artificial intelligence as a trend itself. It's the next era of computing. So within that category alone, we're looking at 27 different areas, different emerging trends that range from trends in the enterprise, which has to do with funding, to really granular developments like hierarchical reinforcement learning, which is the sort of, if you saw Karate Kid, it's the wax on, wax off approach to machine learning, which is to say that, systems are doing many things at once and learning a single skill from all of those other more discrete areas. So AI was a big area, and also a part of that had to do with China. So we're in the throes of what appears to potentially be the beginnings of a trade war with China. And, if that's something you're paying attention to, it would be helpful to also think about that within the context of China's, quick rise to global dominance in AI. They have, at an institutional and national level, there's so much money pouring in. They are quickly filing all kinds of patents, scooping up IP, and they are a formidable force in informing the future of AI. So that was a huge part of the report. Some other big sort of key findings had to do with smartphones and mobile devices. So using our data and modeling, we would say that 2018 is the beginning of the end of smartphones. For people who are desperately holding on to their crackberries, the last vestiges. I mean, I know that may seem crazy, especially given that Mobile World Congress just had a bunch of new devices out. But if you stop and think about it, the device penetration has started to slow. The number of devices on the market and the type of the devices on the market are incrementally different. So basically people aren't buying phones like they used to. And so we're seeing a shift away from rapid adoption of new mobile devices. At the same time, we're seeing all kinds of new smart wearables that over the next 10 years are going to start to replace a lot of the functionality that we had with our mobile phones. So these would be smart, flexible screens that we carry with us, smart AR glasses, wristbands, rings, et cetera, et cetera. So that was another big key area. And I guess maybe, there were lots of key areas, but maybe a third insight has to do with biology. So one, I think, blind spot a lot of folks have when looking at the future of tech is also considering the future of biotech. And I would argue that biology will probably emerge as the most important technology platform of the 21st century. And so within biology, there are lots of other interesting convergences and intersections, like tiny little robots that, can be injected and will soon run around the inside of your body, delivering medicine and performing maintenance-related works. So there's a ton to pay attention to. And the crux of all of this is you have to pay attention to everything, because we're at this moment of convergence where a lot of these very groundbreaking and important technologies overlap.
You, in your report, you also include a list of the world's smartest cities. How do you define a smart city? I mean, who's doing it right?
Right. So that was a new addition to the report this year, and it has been controversial to say the least. So we pulled data from lots of different sources, but we were sort of interested in looking at how cities are managing their data, the data of their citizens, the infrastructure data, the day-to-day governing data, like all that stuff. But we were also looking at things like smart grids, which ostensibly would set a city up to make transportation easier, gridlock less, horrific. The availability of broadband services, the viability of 5G networks. So how hard is that city working to help upgrade its, to partner to help upgrade its networks? So we considered lots of different sources of data. And then we didn't, so in the report, it's alphabetical. A lot of people thought that we ranked those those cities in an order. It's alphabetical, but that was part of the insanity that ensued. But basically what we did was we surfaced the cities, we tried to be as comprehensive as we could, but the cities that we thought were best positioned to, take the future by the reins. And so that's how we came up with that list.
You also included a calendar of events that will shape technology this year. What are some of the most important events that are going to happen in the near future?
Right. So a lot of times people who are paying attention to tech look to product launches, or they look to sort of like the big industry meetings like Mobile World Congress, or the Apple events, the product launches from Microsoft. But you kind of have to pay attention to other things that are happening as well. So I would argue that one of the most critically important things to happen in 2018 will happen in May. And that's when the GDPR, which is a new complicated regulatory structure, goes into place in Europe and throughout the EU. Now, you may be wondering, why should I care about some law that's going into play in the EU if I'm living in Austin, Texas? The reason for that is that this sets up a series of events that will cause information to flow differently online. And, there could be a lot of unintended consequences that result, like Facebook and Twitter and Google, and all of Amazon, like all of the Spotify, all of the really big tech companies, have an impossible time with enforcement and compliance. And, it also means that depending on where you are, you may see a different version of the internet. So one offshoot of this could be a splintered internet, or a series of splinter nets where regionally information shows up differently. So this is going to have long-term, long-range reverberating effects. And folks in the United States just are not paying attention. If you mention GDPR to anybody outside the regulatory and compliance space in tech, they don't know what you're talking about. And you still have some time to get smart about GDPR and to think through how it's going to affect you and what you do. So that's a big one.
That's a huge one.
Yeah. Throughout the year, there's some other interesting things happening. So this past week was the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination. I'm a futurist, but I also take into context what's happened throughout history. So, this is the 10th anniversary of the iPhone. This is the 5th anniversary of Aaron Swartz. You're going to edit this later, right? No, too late.
You're fine.
Okay. Anyways, so there have been a lot. This is a year of a lot of anniversaries. So it's good to take some time to reflect on where we're at as well.
You talk about trends, but there are trends that are actual trends. There are big significant changes. You mentioned GDPR, which I think is actually going to have a much bigger impact, as you pointed out, than most business are ready for. Most businesses are not prepared for this. And then there's trendy things. How do you define trends versus trendy?
Right. So this is another sort of tricky area. It's easy to get distracted by shiny objects, and there are certainly plenty of shiny objects within the tech space. So we define tech trends as having four characteristics, the ones that you should pay attention to. So, they tend to evolve as they emerge. They tend to show up as a series of what seem to be unconnectable dots. They somehow leverage, human behavior as we're changing. So these are sort of data-driven, long-term shifts in how we relate to technology, and they evolve. So this is the 11th year of our annual reports, the 11th edition. Some of the trends that are in our report this year have been in the report now for 10 years. It doesn't mean that they're not, tech trends that you should be paying attention to. They certainly are. It's just that they've got a longer trajectory. And occasionally we have tech trends that definitely emerge as a bona fide trend, and then fall off the list, either because there was some kind of chaotic event that was, that caused collapse or change or pivot, or because they converged and moved along with some other data points and nodes and became something different.
You talked about China earlier, and I have to say one of those big events that's probably going to change things is Facebook's relationship with Cambridge Analytica and our focus on data and data collection and how that's being used. But are we overreacting here in the United States? I mean, we're kind of freaking out over this, but then you mentioned China earlier with a population of, 1.3 billion people, and it's very different. The culture is very different, and the way that they view privacy is very different. So, I want you to talk a little bit about that, because they actually think it's okay to use facial recognition, and I've heard you say, you can, and I haven't experienced this myself, is that you can actually pay for products by smiling. I mean, data and privacy is not a concern in China. So are we overreacting? Are we, what do we have to look forward to? Are we going to be China one day?
Well, so I lived in China for a while, and I think that I'm definitely not a China expert, but I can say from experience that there's a greater awareness in China that, surveillance happens, and that, somebody is looking over your shoulder. I think in the United States, our expectation is we have a right to use this stuff, and how dare some other entity come in and scrape our information or use it in a way that they didn't, let us know first, which to me is more about us being naive than anything else. China makes up a big chunk of our report this year, and not just in the AI section. You'll see China all over the place. And, again, I don't know how to drive this point home enough. They just changed their laws and regulations to basically allow the current president to stay in that position for a pretty long time. When you have somebody in a position for a much longer period of time, that allows them to enact and to see through sweeping changes and regulations, because they've got the time to do it. They're playing a long game. If we think about some of the other big key events in technology that are happening this year, September. So we've got the GDPR in May. In September, there are starting in September, lots of different new electric vehicles that are supposed to go to market. But if we have a trade war with China, what happens to the components and all of the different pieces of that puzzle? Brexit is supposed to finally get underway in October, but that also has some implications about the research, the researchers who are working in fields like AI. And so there's a lot that's happening. And so you can't, if you want to understand the future of tech, you really have to pay attention to lots of different areas at once. And some of that has to do with the obvious, like data and privacy and security, but some of it has to do with like geopolitics, you know, and so it's complicated, but that's why we produce this reports to help everybody get a better lay of the land.
And you do just that, Amy. I really appreciate it. And your report is chock full of information, like you said, including a lot of information about China and trends to pay attention to and trends to maybe think about in the future. If somebody wants to connect with you, maybe they want more Karate Kid quotes, or maybe they just want to find a copy of your report, how can they do that?
Sure. So all of my research, my methodology, and all of the work that we do at the Future Today Institute is available for free. So I open sourced my methodology and all of our work a year ago. So the emerging tech trends report that we've been talking about is available for download. And anybody can access it and use it. So you can get that off of our website, which is futuretodayinstitute.com. I'm on Twitter at Amy Webb. And if you're a student at NYU tuning in, you should take my Foresight class. I teach the MBA course on Foresight, and it's pretty terrific. So maybe I'll see you in person in the fall.
Well, I think I should take that course. Is it available online?
It is not actually, and it gets waitlisted. It fills up very, very fast, and it's super intense, and everybody gets exhausted by the end of it. But it's an amazing experience.
You're intense, Amy, but in a very good way. And I really appreciate your time. If you guys want to connect with me, you can do that right here on ZDNet or Tech Republic, or maybe join me on Facebook by searching for The Tanya Hall Show, or connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you want to chat, I'd love it if you follow me on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. And ultimately, visit my website at tanyahall.net.